Welcome to YouTube Mall Builders Tuesday night show. Tonight we have the great pleasure of having Bill, the track planner, with us. And I tell you what, he and I have been talking a little bit, and he's got a really good show tonight, something a little different. But I want to let everybody know to go to YouTubeMallBuilders.com. That way you can check on the schedules for all our shows, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not Thursday, excuse me, but Saturday. And see what time the shows are, because they are at different times now to accommodate different time zones and the people in the shows. But also be sure and click on the e-mag, sign up for our e-magazine. JD and his team do a jam up good job. We got one coming out this month here, very soon. And we got a busy week this week. We've got the show tonight. We got our Arduino show Wednesday, tomorrow night. And we also have a live show that's coming Saturday. So busy week. But be sure to go to YouTubeMallBuilders.com. There you can get all your info and check schedules and sign up for the e-mag. You'll get a notification when it comes out. That way you can download it as a PDF file. And be sure to check the times of the shows, because Tuesday and Wednesday are at 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. Thursday and Saturday shows are at 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. So, let me get back over here and push the button.
You're freezing up a little bit, Johnny.
Oh, okay. Well, here we go. We got Mr. Bill here with the track planner. I'm going to turn it over to him, and it's all yours now, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. Appreciate it. The show tonight is actually a little bit of a rerun of one I did a couple of years ago. I don't know if anybody will remember it or that, but I'm trying to coordinate. My shows come out at the same time as the e-mag comes out. So JD and I have been trying to maybe incorporate a little bit about the article that I write with doing the show here. So the e-mag article this month I wrote is, do you have a plan? And I don't mean track plan. What I mean is a plan to build a railroad. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I tend to notice people starting layouts, don't have a real good plan, not sure where they want to go. They get into it a year or two, or sometimes not even that long, and all of a sudden they're tearing it out and they're building another one. And I happened to watch a show, the name will remain anonymous, but I happened to watch a show the other night where a gentleman is starting a new layout. He's doing a marginally better job than he did on the first one, but he still doesn't have what I would consider a pretty solid plan. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation I did for our club a number of years ago. This is on a layout that I built back in 2000, from about 2004 to about 2008. It has since been torn down. It doesn't exist anymore, but I think it's one that will kind of give everybody a good idea about at least my thinking and how I planned this particular railroad out. And it's really the same thing I did on my current layout, same way I planned it out. We're going to do a screen share here. So I need people or Johnny to tell me that we can see it. Everybody can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. We're up then. Again, this is a little bit of a repeat. I've changed a couple things, but this is somewhat of a repeat of about maybe 3 years ago or so. But I had a railroad that was called the Camas Prairie Railroad. There actually was a railroad called Camas Prairie Railroad. It was up in Idaho. I'll show you all that in a minute. But this is a presentation of how I designed it with the main objective as operations on it. So we'll go through these slides. If questions come up, go ahead and ask them, because I told Johnny to interrupt me at any point here, and we'll try to get your questions answered. So
Yeah, go full screen. Go full screen the 3 times.
Okay.
Nobody can hear me.
Okay, I'm going to go full screen here. Okay, I've gone full screen. Is that going to help or not? It's on my other monitor. I can bring it over to It's as full a screen as I can do it. Okay. All right. Now, Camas Prairie. It's in Idaho. This railroad was called the Idaho's Railroad on Stilts. I'll explain that in a minute, but this is the second subdivision, which is what I actually modeled there. This happens to be one of many, many, many bridges on this second subdivision up there in Idaho. And it's one of the things that kind of got me interested in this railroad. And one of the things I want to talk about as I'm going through these pictures is I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. I grew up 5 blocks from the UP main line. My business was across the street from the Union Pacific headquarters for almost 35 years. I know Union Pacific, but I also knew that I never would have the space to model the Union Pacific Railroad and do it any kind of justice at all. So I like to pick smaller railroads, smaller situations that are become believable. As you'll see that as we go along through here, when I talk about the believability of a layout. This railroad here actually was owned by the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern jointly. They had a 99-year or longer agreement on this particular railroad. Now, what we're going to talk about tonight is where's the Camas Prairie located, prototype versus freelance layouts, how I'm designing it for operation, and we'll kind of briefly go over the car forwarding system I used and things to make the layout feel larger. Okay. Now, where was this railroad located? Well, it was located basically in northwestern Idaho. The red circle that you see was the Camas Prairie Railroad, and it encompassed 4 subdivisions. The black circle that you see was the second subdivision, which is what I modeled, and it basically ran from Lewiston, Idaho to Grangeville, Idaho. There, it was the distance there is a little less than 100 miles, about 66, 67 miles, I think, is what it is. The main commodities on the Camas Prairie Railroad was timber, paper, and grain there. So for me, that's probably 3 of my favorite things on model railroading. So it worked out perfectly for me when I was doing the research. Now, these are pictures that I picked up online. This was a part of it that was called the loop. And what it ran from Lewiston to Grangeville. There was over a 3,000 foot elevation change, which in model railroading is great because we like to have some elevation changes. It makes for a much more interesting layout, and it helps us gain elevation. And actually, if we can do some hidden tracks and things like that, we can make the things seem larger, longer, trains running longer, and that through some hidden areas. But this is one of the loops on the second subdivision. This is all second subdivision things you're going to see here. Now I'll blow this up a little bit. Here's one of the reasons they called it Idaho's Railroad on Stilts. You'll see 4 trestles there, probably in less than a mile along that route. This is the same route, the same area I just showed you in the last picture. It's just showing you these 4 trestles that were built. This railroad eventually got shut down, and the reason it got shut down is there wasn't the commodities being shipped, and the physical cost to keep all of these trestles in good operating order was horrendous. It was just ridiculous what it cost to keep the railroad in an operation standpoint. Now, this is another picture of the Camas Prairie, and as you can see, some fairly neat scenery. It's just a lot of things worked out well for a model railroad there. I just thought this was a really, really good land to choose. Again, here was the timber business they had. Now you see Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Power. That's because Burlington and the UP own this line jointly. They shared in the revenue, and they also shared in the expenses of the line for many, many years. And there's a trestle there. So as you've seen in these pictures, lots of things that would work well when you want to design a model railroad there. These are all scenes along the Camas Prairie. Grain elevators, perfect for if you like grain elevators, you like grain operations. You had the mountains, you had the grain business. I thought this was one of the neater scenes. And I did I put together a scene like this on the layout, not exactly, but similar to it there. And then it was kind of interesting. It went from about 600 feet elevation up to 3,600 feet elevation. And this is actually up at the top. This is up in the plains, or the 36 foot elevation, 3,600 foot elevation area on its way to Grangeville. And there we have Union Pacific Power and a whole bunch of Burlington Northern grain cars behind it, which I always thought was kind of an interesting picture. Okay, why do we want to design for operation? Well, I stress this very hard, especially when I design track plans. We try to create a miniature transportation system. We're not creating a model railroad. We're trying to create a transportation system. We want the train movements to have a purpose. We want to, if we do that, we'll learn about prototype operations. It'll just come along automatically. If you have an operating layout, you get to share it with your friends, which is, I think, a huge part of the hobby. And bottom line for me, operations is just a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do. Okay, this is the layout when it was basically 90% complete. And what you're seeing here, I'll show you the track plan, as bad as it is one I did many, many, many moons ago. But this was basically a walk-along track plan. Below this picture, down below where it says design for operation, is a yard that held about 65 to 75 cars. And then the train ran around up through a center peninsula and eventually gained elevation on the layout. And we'll go through all the things that I had on this layout. But this scene here, you'll see a lower main line here, and you'll see the upper main line up on here, up on this area. That's all the same main line. It just looped back over itself once or twice. And that's how I gained elevation. That's also how I made the main line longer, which you want to try to have as long a main line as you can when you're building an operating layout. Okay, there's the track plan from the picture you just seen before this, the previous one. Over in this area here, and I didn't show it very well, but this was all staging back in this area. And this is where the trains came out onto the layout here, or they came out on the layout here, or there was a branch line up here they came out on. But this is where the trains came out. Here was that yard area and basically the trains followed the wall around here till they got over on this side. Then they came out on the peninsula, went around on the outside edge of the peninsula. Then I looped it, looped it back in around here on a loop, and then it came back out right here and came back over the top of itself. I'll have some pictures showing that area right there. Gaining elevation all the way, coming all the way up around here, hidden here in a tunnel, coming back out here until we had reached almost the summit, which is up in this area here. There. So, and by the way, this space, as you'll see here, was less than 20 foot square. It wasn't that big of a space for the layout, but this was the basic layout of the layout. You'll see these town names. I'll talk about those in a few minutes here as we go along. But this is what I consider to be a walk along track plan, and if it has a little bit of familiarity, as a lot of you may know, if you've watched my other stuff, I'm a huge fan of the V&O, Virginia and Ohio layout. And this track plan is similar to that. It has some of the same similarities. Okay, layout specs. Now we're going to get into this planning stage that we talk about, deciding what do I want, what do I want to have it do. For me, I wanted it to be a prototype freelance, and I'll explain that as a little later here about why that's the best type of model railroad to build, or transportation system, as I like to say. I wanted HO scale, I wanted to run UP and Burlington Northern because if I'm doing the Camas Prairie, that's what they did. But I'm also a fan of the Montana Rail Link. So I wanted a connection to the Montana Rail Link. I'll show you how I did that here a little later. The locale was Northwest Idaho. I was modeling the late summer of 1985. The space was basically 21 by 19. My lowest point on the layout was 45 inches above the floor, which was at Lewiston, and the highest point was 62. I gained all that elevation without the use of a helix. There was by wrapping the main line back over itself once and that. DCC control, obviously, open grid, which I'm a big fan of. I used the spline roadbed system on this layout, where I took and cut 4x8 sheets of masonite, quarter-inch masonite, into 1-inch strips, and then I took 7 of them, turned them on edge, glued them together, and we had this 8-foot length of 7 strips glued together, which made my roadbed. Great way to build a layout. I would do that again if I was building another one, this same type of layout. I used code 83, and then I tried to keep everything at minimum of number 5 turnouts up to number 8 turnouts. So this was kind of the specs for the layout. This is what I wanted. These are kind of the givens on the layout, if we were using that term. There. A few more specs on it here. Walk in, walk around. I had about 150-foot single track main line. I had 3 passing sidings. The passing sidings were designed for 15 to 20 car lengths there. 22-inch minimum radius, 2.5% grade. I had 11 staging tracks on this layout. There, it doesn't seem like that seems like maybe a lot. Really, I could have easily had 18 or 20 staging tracks. 11 was just barely enough from an operation standpoint. I had one yard that held approximately 65 cars. There were 4 towns on the on the layout, and there were 15 industries on the layout. Okay, I modeled the second subdivision. Again, as I said earlier, there were 4 subdivisions on the Camas Prairie. I chose this one for basically these reasons that you see right here. From Lewiston, Idaho, up to Camas, up to Grangeville, was less than 70 miles there. The elevation changed from 700 feet to almost 3,700 feet in that less than 70 mile trip. Again, made for a great railroad track plan to copy for a model railroad. The ruling grade was 3%. The average grade was 2.2%. From milepost 13.5 to milepost 25, there was 11.5 miles of track, 7 tunnels, 17 bridges in that space, and most of the curves were pretty sharp at 15 degrees there. So just some more of the things about the rail. So these pictures that you see that I've added, these are pictures from the layout. These are actual pictures that I took on the layout there. Okay. I wanted the Camas Prairie to be a bridge route, meaning that it simply moved traffic from other railroads kind of through the area, plus it had its own industries. My offline towns, and these were the staging areas on the layout, I had 1 staging yard that represented Spokane, Washington. That's what you see by this black line coming down here. Right in this little circle, if you can see the pointer, that's Lewiston, Idaho. It's right on the Washington, Idaho border there. That's Lewiston. So I invented a line that came down from Spokane down to there. That was my Burlington Northern connection with my railroad. Then the yellow line going to the south, that's the connection down to Boise, Idaho, which was another hidden staging yard on the layout. And the yellow line shows how we got from Boise up to Lewiston there. Then the one I invented, these 2 could have easily and probably did exist at one time, but this is the one I invented. This was the Montana Rail Link connection that ran from Missoula, Montana over to Grangeville there. It didn't run to Lewiston, it ran to Grangeville. Why did I do it that way? Well, I got a map out through Google one time, and I looked. There's a valley that runs at about a kind of a northeast, mostly east way over to Montana. And there never was a railroad in that valley, but they could have easily have built one there. So in my freelancing part of this railroad, I made a connection with the Montana Rail Link and the Camas Prairie, and it connected at Grangeville there. So that was the 3 railroads that I had on this layout there. And again, these 3 towns there was Boise, Idaho, Missoula, and Spokane. Again, those were all staging yards on the layout. Okay, prototype or freelance. What I want to show you here is the scene on the left is actually a scene on the Camas Prairie 2nd subdivision. The scene on the right is one I created on my layout. They kind of look alike a little bit, but this is where, when I'm doing prototype freelance, I use prototype things, but I kind of allow myself to freelance it a little bit. It looks similar. It's not exactly right, but it looks similar to it. And it was a good representation of this particular area on the railroad. Okay, prototype freelance, we've got advantages, we've got disadvantages, we've got keepers, and then we have some additions that we do from the freelancing. This picture you see here is actually of trains coming out of staging onto the layout from the Montana Rail Link connection that I added to this layout there. It's at the Craigmont Junction, and it's where all the Montana Rail Link stuff came onto the layout or left the layout. Okay, prototype. What's the advantages? The information is readily available. It's not hard with the internet today to get pretty much any information you want on any railroad that exists or did exist. The prototype helps keep you, I think anyway, it helps keep you focused. You tend to kind of focus yourself in certain things in that. And if it's a popular prototype, equipment is readily available. You don't have to be doing custom painting or doing things like that. And the great thing about the Camas Prairie is later on it was bought out by a company called Rail Link, but before that it was just Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Power. They didn't repaint anything on that. So again, that worked out great from a modeling standpoint. The disadvantages: too much information. On some of these railroads, you get so much information that you pick up, then you kind of lose sight of what you really want to do. So you got to be careful of overload, getting too much information overload. I can guarantee you there's never enough space when you're trying to build a model railroad. I don't care how big it is. The thing I try to impress people with, especially in my design business, is making the track plan and the layout believable. And the best way I could describe that is, I don't care how much space you've got, if you think you want to model from Omaha to Cheyenne, Wyoming, you're not going to build a believable layout. There's just too much space in between there. It's not going to happen. If you want to model from Denver down to Cheyenne, it's about 70 miles, something like that. Yeah, you can probably make that fairly believable, but you can't model from Omaha to Cheyenne and do what I think is anything believable. If you want to pick an area of 70, 80, or 100 miles someplace between Omaha and Cheyenne, that's fine, but you can't model the whole thing from one end to the other. Okay, what's the advantages and disadvantages of freelance railroads? You can use your imagination when the freelance is there. If there's things you like, put them in. You've got the freedom to do that. Put in whatever you want there. You can personalize the layout to anything that you want, the way you want it there. Disadvantages, sometimes freelancing, you tend to start straying a little bit. You don't stay focused. Keeping focus can be hard. Ready to run equipment isn't always available on a freelanced railroad. there. But some people like to paint engines. I personally don't like to do that kind of stuff, but some people do. So it's not a problem. You try to include too much stuff. This is always the biggest problem you see on a lot of layouts I see people build. They jam a lot of track work into a small area, then they jam a lot of structures into a small area, and it's just not believable as far as I'm concerned. Okay, what are the keepers on a prototype freelance railroad? Well, what I did on the Camas Prairie was I tried to do the track configuration similar to the prototype, not exact, not tie for tie, but just similar, so that anybody that was familiar with the area would say, oh yeah, I can remember that area. I remember that area, that spot. The towns, I kept all the names. The names that I used on this railroad are names that were on the Camas Prairie second subdivision. They're very prototypical. I did the same thing with a lot of the industries. I didn't always put them in the right spot necessarily, but I used prototype industries that were on the second subdivision there. And I actually used a few that were on the third and fourth subdivisions too. The consists that I ran on this, and we ran about 18 to 20 trains in an operating session on this layout, they were very consistent with the era, and they were consistent with the type of trains that ran in 1985 up there on the Camas Prairie. Okay, and this kind of gets in the weeds a little bit, but I'll try to explain it and not put you to sleep. These were some of the freelance additions that I did. I extended the main line using hidden staging by having these 3 staging areas that we talked about. Boise was the Union Pacific. I had 4 staging tracks there. Spokane was the Burlington Northern staging. I had 5 tracks there. And then Missoula, Montana was the eastern end of the system, and I had 2 staging tracks there. So that's how I got the 11 staging tracks that I talked about earlier. I added the Montana Rail Link branch because I wanted to run some Montana Rail Link equipment and that's where I added the 2 staging tracks. The interesting thing about that is somebody says, well, you just added 2 trains. No, you really added 4 trains, because if you've got 2 tracks in hidden staging during an operating session, normally 2 trains are going to leave staging, 2 trains are going to enter staging. So that's 4 trains you're running on with just 2 staging tracks. I think that's an important thing for people to remember. Okay, I changed the track arrangement. I didn't follow it exactly there because of adding the Montana Rail Link. I had to come up with something that was kind of believable. So I changed around the towns of Cottonwood and Grangeville. I kind of moved them to a branch line. They really weren't on a branch line, but it just happened to work out better for me there. Craig Mountain Sawmill, it was closed before 1985. I wanted a sawmill on the layout, so I reopened it. Again, that's the freelance part of the layout. I changed the physical location of some of the industries, and the big thing was Craigmont, Idaho was renamed Craigmont Junction, Idaho, because that's where I interchanged with the Montana Rail Link at that point. So that's why I just added the word junction to it. Now, this is something that I don't see a lot of people talk about on YouTube videos, and I think it's a very, very important thing to consider when you're doing a layout. The biggest industry on this Camas Prairie Railroad was the paper mill, the potlatch paper mill. It was huge. I'm going to show you a picture here next on the next slide of how big it really was. But this is my representation of the potlatch paper mill. This is a 10-foot long space by 2-foot wide. And I have 4 industries here. There's the industry here, there's this industry here, there's the pellets here, and there's a dump here for the wood chips. We would ship, and then there was a shipping out on this track here that shipped out of this paperboard mill here. This was the favorite job on the railroad for a lot of people because it was really a very short run from the yard, but you had to switch out 11 to 13 cars here and drop off 11 to 13. my most experienced operator I had, and there's no tricks to this track plan. There's nothing tricky here. It all works. But my most experienced operator, it would take him about 40 minutes in real time to switch this out and get all the cars spotted correctly. I had a kind of a newbie show up one time, and he said, "Oh, give me the hardest job you've got." So I gave him this job here, and 2.5, almost 3 hours into the operating session, he hadn't finished switching it yet. He hadn't got it all figured out yet, and he did admit that it was probably a little over his head after it was over with. So here's a 2-foot by 10-foot space that offered a lot of operations there. Now, again, remember, this is the Potlatch paper mill. Here's the Potlatch paper mill, just outside of Lewiston. This is a bridge up here. This is the river. You can see how big this thing is. Well, there's no way, I don't care if we had an auditorium, that you could probably successfully model the Potlatch paper mill. So I chose, out of all these buildings and all this stuff, I chose three buildings, 3 things to model. I chose the Clearwater tissue mill, the paperboard buildings, and the wood chip pile there to model. And it worked out very, very well. There was a ton of other things that you could have added, but I knew I didn't have the space. So this is an extreme case of selective compression, but it still worked, and it worked well. Okay. Types of track. I want to talk about the types of track plans you can build. The DCC that I used, era specifics, operators, train types, and we'll touch a little bit maybe on car forwarding there. This is a picture of a bridge that was on, you've seen that picture at the beginning of these slides of that truss bridge, that girder bridge. This was my representation on the layout of that bridge. It was called the Lawyer's Bridge. Okay. You can have multiple track configurations that you can build. Point-to-point railroads are the best to have realistic operations. I'll explain that here on the next slide. You can do continuous running. That's probably 75 or 80% of the layouts that I design are designed with continuous running built into them. Why? Because my clients want it. They ask for it there. It's a great way to watch trains. It isn't always the best way to do realistic operations, but it's one of the things that you put up with, and I try to design them in such a way that it becomes part of the operation. Out and backs, that's a really good design to do if you're going to do a short line railroad where it comes from somewhere and it goes back to somewhere and services railroads. I like out and back designs. They're very prototypical, and they're very good from an operation standpoint. So switching layouts, that's basically shelf layouts where you've got a very, very small space, and but you still want to build a railroad, you still want to operate. So switching layouts, not a thing wrong with them. Matter of fact, I just got through designing one for a customer up in Canada that is basically an L-shaped switching layout. Okay, point-to-point operations. What's the advantages? It does really make for realistic operations. Why? Trains, if you have a true point-to-point track plan, trains travel through the layout once per op session there. And if you think about the real world, that's what trains do. They travel through a scene one time there. And so that to me is very prototypical. The big thing is you create the illusion that the trains are actually going somewhere. That's why I had those 11 hidden staging tracks on my layout, is the trains came from somewhere and they went somewhere. It just happened to be that the Camas Prairie Railroad was kind of the stage where people seen them there. Okay. Point to point. The disadvantages of a point-to-point system is you need a moderate to large amount of space to really make it work, because you've got staging yards to worry about. You want to make the mainline runs long enough so that it feels like you're actually going somewhere. You need multiple staging yards, which obviously if you don't have the space can be an issue. And it does require some extra track planning if you want to include continuous running, like a lot of people do. Okay, this I can almost skip over because this is today. I think when I first did this, we still had people in our club that were using DC, and that today everybody uses DCC. So this is kind of, we can talk about it, but it doesn't, everybody uses it today. It's kind of a wasted slide, I think. But definitely things run better. You do away with the block toggle switches. And I know there's a whole generation of modelers out there who've never run on a layout with DC. If you want a little history lesson and you want to really appreciate digital command control, just go operate one time on a layout with DC, not DCC. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And now the big thing is sound. Everybody wants sound on their railroads. Okay. The disadvantages of startup costs could be high. They're not super high there. You do have to learn a little bit of a programming. Some of this, I happen to use NCE, which is, I think, about as simple as you can get. I used to own Digitrax. I didn't think Digitrax made it super simple to do some programming, but it's gotten much better there. The big thing is wiring the layout. You can, if you've got a DC layout, it can take some time to rewire it for DCC. It's easier, but it still takes time. Okay. Era-specific thoughts. Again, these are things, what I'm going through here for everybody is kind of my thought process of how I thought about designing this layout. You do want to pick a timeline. And this is strictly arbitrary. This is my own opinion on it. Some people like to choose a decade, which I think is a good way to do it. Some people use a specific year. I personally think that's a better way to do it. And then some people choose a specific day, and it's kind of like Groundhog's Day. Every operating session is just a repeat of things that went on that particular day on that particular railroad. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's fine. Motive power and rolling stock. One of the things I see on a lot of railroads is I see, and I shouldn't say it bothers me, but I don't think it looks very believable, is when people have gone out and bought the latest, greatest, newest Gevo engine, and then they're running 40-foot boxcars that were built in 1935 behind this thing. That's not really very believable. Most rolling stock was good for 25 years. Some of it would go a little longer than that. So I always tried to make sure that everything, all the rolling stock on my railroad was no more than 25 years old. That's where the believability was. Buildings and autos, two different stories there. You can have buildings that are 100 years old, because we've got buildings around today that are 150 years old that still exist and are still occupied. So that's not really a big problem there. Autos, I always tell people 15 years or newer, that's what you kind of would like to put on the layout if you're depicting a particular year on your railroad. Okay, traffic on the Camas Prairie Railroad. I ran through freights, unit trains, locals, and turns. We'll go through those fairly quickly here and explain what each one of those did there. Number of operators that I had, operator size depends on the size of your layout. Lots of times less operators can be better. People aren't stepping on top of each other, they aren't getting in each other's way. You don't have a lot of conversations going on between people who don't have something to do. So I'm always a fan of less is better there. Operator experience on this particular layout, one of the things I would do was my regular operators would get the tougher jobs. If I had somebody new operating on the layout, I would tend to give them the easier jobs at the beginning of the op session. That way they got familiar with the layout. They knew where the trains were kind of going. And then later on in the op session, we could give them maybe some harder jobs to do and that. Okay, again, here's the types of trains that I ran on the layout. This picture here, just for the sake of talking about it, it was one of my passing sightings on the railroad, and this is where the trains that went into this tunnel just simply loop back over and this is the track where it looped back over itself, going back onto the peninsula there. It made kind of a neat scene when it was all said and done. This is a helper pocket here where we had helper trains, helper engines that helped these trains, especially the loaded coal trains, up the hill there, because this was a going upgrade as you went into the tunnel. Okay, through freights, what did they do? Well, it was really pretty simple. They ran from staging to staging. That's all they did. They did exchange cars in the main yard, which was the Lewiston yard on the railroad there. They did not do any switching on the layout itself. They didn't stop at any industries. They simply stopped at the Lewiston yard. They exchanged, they dropped off cars and picked up cars according to the waybill and car card system. It was basically a second-class priority trains that ran there. The locals, they worked the branch lines. They dropped and picked up cars en route. They ran yard to staging or staging to yard. There, whichever way you want to do, the train was set up to run there. But those were locals that, maybe a better way to describe this, it would come out of staging, go to Lewiston yard, drop off all of their cars, pick up a train that was leaving Lewiston yard, going back where this train had come from, and it was simply running back into staging. So the trains ran yard to staging or staging to yard. That's what the locals did. Turns did exactly what they say they do. They originated in Lewiston yard. They went out and worked specific towns on the railroad. Then they returned to Lewiston yard. Unit trains, they were like through freights. They basically ran from staging to staging. I didn't have any unit trains. I never had an industry on this layout that was big enough that you could put a unit train in there. That's something else now that I think about it, I'd like to at least talk about. One of the problems I see on a lot of layouts, people try to put too big of industries on their layouts. They try to put intermodal when the layout is not even close to being big enough to make intermodal believable. You need a lot of space, you need a lot of room to do intermodal operations there. They put in big industries. My favorite is the ethanol, Walther's ethanol. You need a huge amount of space if you're going to represent a Walther's ethanol operation successfully, because every building in that series is big and huge. Unit trains, they were coal trains, basically some grain trains. They were all considered as third-class rated trains. They had very little priority over anything else that ran on the layout. We would run 18 trains per off session. I would run 5 through freights. We had 2 coal trains, 2 grain trains, 1 reefer train. There, I had 4 locals that ran and 4 turns that ran. That's kind of how we divided up the trains that operated on the layout. I used a car forwarding system. Basically, you see this pocket here that's got the car cards and waybills in it. This is when I had a Digitrax system. This layout here was Digitrax. Later on, I converted to NCE on that. But this is one of the scenes on the. This scene is also about probably 15 inches deep total, maybe 18 at the very most. It certainly looks deeper than that, but that's because of the way I did the scenery and kind of gave the illusion of it being a much deeper scene than it really was. Okay, we'll talk a little bit here. I've done this in previous shows, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we'll talk about the car forwarding system that I used on the railroad here. There's the types you can use is car cards, waybills, switch lists, and tabs on cars. I'm a big fan of car cards and waybills. I think that's the best way to operate a railroad. I'm not a huge fan of switch lists because their switch lists usually are generated by a computer program, and the computer program thinks it knows where the car is at, but I don't think I ever held an op session where a car didn't get spotted in the wrong industry. The computer didn't know that, so then you always had a problem of, well, this car is not where it's supposed to be, and you had to go find it. I had about 200 freight cars on this railroad, so you were always trying to search to find the car. It's not fun. Tabs on cars, that's kind of an old system. There was a gentleman that used that system. Matter of fact, he still uses it today, and it's reasonably successful. It works okay. Tabs on cars, for those of you that don't know what it is simply putting a little tab. In his case, he used washers, painted washers with some information written on them, and he had a little pin stuck in the top of, say, like a grain car, box car, or whatever. That little washer set on top of the car. It told you where the car would go. It's kind of an interesting system. These were, I now use a slightly different car card system, but this was my engine card. This was the train card that told you what train was going to run. I shouldn't say engine card. This was my train card. And it told, this happened to be a Burlington Northern westbound through freight. And it took 3 lines to tell you that it was a through freight. It stopped at Lewiston Yard, dropped off and picked up cars. That's it. It just ran from staging to staging. There was my engine card, and I would put a picture on it, and I would put the information on it for the operators to be able to find that engine when they were supposed to get the engines to put onto a consist. These here that you see here, those are I used to program. I have a whole nother PowerPoint presentation I did on speed matching locomotives. Very simple one, but it worked well for me. This was simply the numbers for this particular GP30. I had a low speed of 3.6 miles per hour. I had a top speed of 39 scale miles per hour on that engine. There. How did I know this? I used a speed tunnel to program all of my engines there. Then for the car cards, this was the car card, and I also had a picture of the car. This makes it very easy for operators to find a car when they're looking for a car. Some people say it's not prototypical. You should look for numbers and that. Now that's fine, but when you got 200 or plus cars on a layout, I didn't want to take a 4-hour op session and make it a 5.5-hour session, because people were constantly trying to hunt for a car and that. So this was just a simpler way, and I think an easier way to do it. And then I used a program by Shenandoah Software, Shinware, to do all of my way bills. And I still use that today. It's a very, very good system. I like it. It works well. How did we run trains? Well, you can do timetables, you can do sign-up sheets, you can do a lot of different things. What I did on my railroad is I ran everything sequentially. I set up a list of trains that ran that night. This is a list for operating session number 8 we were having. And what we did is the first train out was 281, second train was out was 311, third train out was 231. If I had 3 operators and a yard master, the 3 operators took those 3 trains. As soon as one of those 3 guys got done running his train, whatever that was supposed to be doing with it, as soon as you got done with the train, you came back to me. I was the dispatcher, and I gave you the next train in line there. And we would keep running trains till we got down to the bottom of the list. Usually it was a 4 to 4.5 hour op session is what it would take to run those 18 trains on the layout. Okay, making the layout feel larger. This is things that I incorporate into my track plans all the time. View blocks are very important. They make the operator only view the scenes they're in at the present time. They really focuses them. When you do a walk along or a walk around track plan, it actually gives the layout the feeling of being much larger than it really is. I tend to put in hidden turnbacks on some of my designs. This adds length to the main line, again, makes it seem larger. Of course, for me, I can't envision designing an operating layout without having hidden staging there. I just doesn't necessarily have to be hidden, but you have to have staging to make a layout operate prototypically. Town spacing. That was one of the things I was pretty adamant about on the Camas Prairie, is I had a lot of space between towns, even though it was only in a space that was basically 20 by 20 there. I made sure that my trains were never so long that the caboose was leaving one town when the engine was arriving at the next town. That's just not very prototypical. And lastly, I made sure everything ran at scale prototypical speeds. That tends to help slow your operators down a little bit. Some operators really can get trains running pretty fast if you don't program them to a scale speed. Again, we'll go back to this picture that I showed you earlier here. This shows some of the things that I did on the layout. The walk-along design that you see where you follow the train. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but this is a view block up here that divides this side from this side over here. So even a person 6 foot or taller could never see over on this side of the layout if they were standing here. And then another design element that I think is really important when you're designing the layout, Potlatch paper mill here, I had Spalding, Idaho here, and I had the Lewiston yard here. We could have 3 operators in this small area. But because of the way I laid it out, the operators were basically standing back to each other. They were never standing side by side. So they never even hardly noticed that somebody was behind them or off back to their sides a little bit there, because they were concentrating on their particular job. That's again, a design element I like to try to include on a lot of my track plans, where operators are not standing side by side doing things. If you have a multi-level layout, you almost can't get away with that. You'll have operators standing side by side at some point there. That's the end. That's my story. And I'll leave this screen up here if anybody wants to, they can use that to get some information on things. Johnny, I am done.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
No, but I would like to ask CSX Rail Line Productions, let me know what pictures you wanted blown up, because there's a couple of pictures there at the beginning of your presentation. I like the trestle bridges. He was wanting to see a closer view of those.
Okay, we'll go back there. I'm assuming he's talking about the wood trestles.
Probably so.
Okay, well, the one that was right there is that one there. That's a curved trestle. They called it Half Moon Bridge, and it was on that second subdivision.
Yeah.
See if you can get him to say if that's the one he wanted to see.
All right. Yeah, that'd be a good shot right there of it. Yeah, he hasn't responded yet, so okay. See, yes, that's what he said, the wood trestles. So yeah, that's what he wanted to say. Now, Phil Wyman did ask how many pieces of rolling stock to operate the ethanol plant, tank and hopper cars.
That's a good question, Phil. I honestly don't know. Very few. I have probably only designed one layout in the dozens and dozens and dozens I've designed that actually had the ethanol plant in it. Why? Because most of the plans I design, the space I'm designing for isn't large enough to do the ethanol plant and make it, again, back to the word I call believability. Is it really believable on that?
I do have a question here from C&L Lines Curtis. He said, yes. How do view blocks and the valance work together?
Okay. Oh, and by the way, Curtis, I'm sorry I didn't call you back. My wife's been in the hospital and I've been kind of busy. So if you give me another call, I'll be happy to talk to you. I apologize for not getting back to you there. I didn't put valances on this railroad, only because we'll go here and I'll see if I can find that picture. This picture here. The reason I didn't put valances on this railroad is this was in a 2.5 car garage that I had, and it was an unattached garage, completely finished and heated inside, and it had 12-foot ceilings. So it would have been a little difficult to put on. I think valances work great. I don't have any problem with valances. In view blocks, I'm a huge proponent of view blocks, again, because what I try to, and I didn't say it in the program, but I've said it in other shows I've done. I like to create track plans where we create little vignettes. We create little scenes on the railroad that are separate scenes, and you try to divide them. A good example with this picture I've got up here right now, this is the view block running up here where I've got the little cursor running, but it runs right into this mountain. And the mountain's about 4 or 5 inches taller with some snow on top of it. And then I bring the mountain down so it acts as a view block all the way to the end of the peninsula there. And I put just this little short tunnel in there. But that way, what would happen with this layout is based on where the door was that you came into this room from, you only seen about 60% of the layout when you walked in the door, maybe only 50%. If you walked in the door, which was over to the right from where this picture was taken, all of this area in here was not visible from the door because this mountain and this view block blocked your view. People had to walk around this peninsula and get over to here and then to be able to see what was going on over here. Again, probably the best comment I ever had about this railroad, I suppose we held about 20 op sessions on this altogether before I tore it down. The best comment I got was from an operator that was a very, very good operator. And he said, when I walked in the room, I thought, well, this is not much here. He says, after spending 4 hours operating on it, the layout operates much larger than it looks. It feels much larger than it looks. And that's exactly what I was trying to accomplish with it, was give it the feel of a much bigger layout in a space that it was basically 20 by 20.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, let me get back here again. This thing's scrolling. Can you go back to where you had the picture of the 3 bridges? That was up towards the front.
Right. I think he's talking about that picture there.
No, yeah, I think right in there.
Yeah, there's 4 trestles right here.
Yeah. I don't know if you get that any bigger so you can see them better, but.
Well, I can blow it up like that. That might, I don't know if that's any better.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
There was.
Again, this was just an area on this area they called the loop there, where they had all these trestles. I didn't put 4 trestles on mine, but I did put 2 or 3 trestles on it. And that is, again, selective compression is what we're talking about. And again, the great thing about this particular railroad, real railroad, was it offered great scenes. I was only dealing with less than 70 miles of track there, so I could be kind of choosy on what I wanted to choose and still make it believable, still make the railroad believable. I actually had a person who grew up in Grangeville, Idaho, actually came and operated on the layout, and he says, I'm totally comfortable. This all makes sense to me. And he says, I grew up in that part of the world. So that's why I talk about the believability issue.
Yeah, let's see. BNSF buff was the Camas Prairie track warrant at TT and TO. Why did you use the sequence rather than what the prototype used?
Well, first of all, very honestly, I didn't want to learn it because it doesn't interest me that much. I actually operate on layouts that do use track warrants and timetable operation. The reason I don't like timetable operations is it causes at least this is my own opinion, it causes your operators to be more worried about are they getting a job done on time than if they're getting the job done right there. And I would see, and I've seen this happen on other layouts, where people start rushing because they think they're behind according to the timetable there, or they're more worried about the track warrant that they're going to get. I didn't want that on this layout. I wanted people to have fun. So I just told them, take your time. I don't care if it takes you 4 hours to do the job. I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me. Take your time, get the job done. When you're done with that job, come and see me. I'll give you another train to run. And we would just, those trains, when you see that sequential list I had, there was a rhyme and rhythm behind that. That wasn't just throwing dice out on the table and having numbers pop up. Certain trains had to run before other trains ran. And that great example was those through freights. I had a UP and Burlington Northern AM through freights that came through, and I had a UP and a Burlington Northern PM through freights that ran. I had 4 through freights that ran on the layout. Well, what you had to do is the AM ones would come through and they would pick up cars that had been left during the last operating session, and they would leave cars for this session. And then some of my turns and my locals would run after those trains had come through because they had cars to deliver that had come in on those through freights. This was all the yard master's job to get all this sorted out. Because if we had 4 operators, I would have 1 yard master who would work the yard, because that's where all the traffic came through, was the Lewiston yard. And then I would have 3 operators that were actually running different types of trains on the layout. And usually for the size room I had, four operators worked best. 5 or 6 got things started to get a little crowded.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. CSX Rail Line Production said thank you, Bill, for going back and blowing those pictures up. Phil Wyman said, okay, Bill. Yeah. How big a lake? Yeah.
I don't know if I want to hear this.
Yeah. How big of a layout do I have to have? Wait a minute. Let me start over here. Layout to have that ethanol plant. I would like to someday do one. I have several of the models now.
Well, I have all of the ethanol buildings in my garage right now, completed and built, because we have an estate that I handle. I handle estates for our Model Railroad Club here in Colorado. And I'm in charge. I'm the coordinator when somebody passes away to liquidate the estate. This estate had a layout that it was in a room and a half. The biggest room was 55 feet long by 20 feet wide, and he had the whole ethanol plant on there, and it took up about 30 feet, maybe 25 feet by about 10 feet of the center peninsula.
Wow.
And I believe me, there's a lot of layouts, Phil, that I design that don't take up 25 foot by 15 foot, let alone just one industry taking up 15 or 20 feet.
Yeah.
There. And again, you can crunch it down smaller if you want to do that, but this gentleman had built it so that it was pretty prototypical, the way it was designed, and took up a heck of a lot of space. My problem with the ethanol plant, if you really look at it and you see how they've done it, there's not a lot of switching that goes on at that ethanol plant. There's a lot of truck traffic that moves in and out. Yes, you can have a yard next to the buildings that is where all the tankers would get filled and that. But if you really, like in Iowa, I've seen some of those in Iowa, those ethanol plants, the yards where they have the tank cars that service the ethanol plants, those yards are sometimes 3 times bigger than the ethanol plant area is. They're just huge. And usually it's because of the volume of ethanol they're shipping.
Yeah, we got one here from Lee Beckler. What's your thoughts on switching layouts for operations? I'm assuming that's what he's talking about.
Okay. Did he ask a question, or what do you want to know?
He just kind of want to know what your opinion is about switching layouts.
Well, I just got done designing one for a gentleman up in Canada, And what we did with that was it was kind of L-shaped. So I took the L, which was the shortest part of the layout, and I actually included 3 staging tracks on that, so you could run 3 trains off of that L. We did a double main line through the layout, and then I had industries on either side of the double main line. And then I also designed it at the other end of the layout so that he could put a caddy, a kind of a car ferry, not a true boat ferry, but a car caddy that would attach to the end that acted as staging yards on the other end of the layout. So you had staging on both ends of the layout, and it would be very easy to set up an operating setup where trains came from staging onto this shelf layout, did a lot of switching. I could easily, I think the way I designed this, I could easily see 2.5 hours, maybe even 3 hours of operating, because I had 3 tracks on one end and 2 or 3 tracks we could put on the other end. So that's 6 trains that you could run on the layout there. And no, I like switching layouts. I have no problem with those at all, and that. But you have to, you know, my issue is, do they get a little boring after a while?
Yeah.
And that, because you're really not going anywhere.
Yeah, Lee said he's something like Lance Mannheim, if you're familiar with his.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
well, Lance's big thing is less is more.
Yeah.
You know, Lance is big on, we don't want to put a lot, we want to put believable industries, but we don't want to put a whole ton of industries on there.
Yeah, because Lee's building around the wall, and he's doing it in sections right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Lee and I talked one time about some stuff in that.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good start on his. Phil said that he will get a hold of you when he moved to his new place in the future.
Tell him he doesn't have to wait that long.
Yeah.
Tell him he better buy it now, because I got a sneaking feeling Walters is going to discontinue that down the road here. There's just not a lot of layouts that can, you know, a lot of rooms that can do justice to that ethanol thing.
Yeah, I looked at that when they first started coming out. You know, they just had a few buildings there, and I'm sitting there going, hey, you know,
well,
I
it
like
looks neat.
this.
I mean, they got some neat looking buildings.
Yeah.
But if you really a big yard to load all those tank cars.
Yeah, and then they come out with some more, and I kept looking, and I'm going, yeah, okay, I think I'll go look for something else. You know,
just take a look at the size of the buildings.
Yeah, they were big. That's what I looked at was, yeah, I knew that was going to take up a lot of room. Yeah.
Well, Phil, I'm not going to pick on. Yeah, I'll pick on Phil. What the heck? The problem I always run into with my clients, and Phil's probably a fairly good example of that, is Phil would like to have all these things that take up a lot of room, but you don't have a lot of room. You know, Phil doesn't have the room to do that, and most people don't. I've told the story before that this layout that I just showed you tonight here that has since been torn down, I'm now building a new layout that's replacing this one in a much smaller, and I completely changed eras. I went from 1985, which is what the Camas Prairie was. I went back to 1955. I changed all of my Modi power, all of my rolling stock to 1955. Why? Because I've got much sharper curves. I couldn't run 6-axle locomotives, diesels there successfully. So I went back to 1955 when there was only 4-axle engines and 40-foot cars. We didn't have 85-foot, 89-foot cars to run. So I try to, I'll never be successful. I don't care how long I do this. I'll never be successful, but I preach to people. Build what you like, but be honest with yourself about what you're building. And, you know, we can't put a 200 square foot layout in a 100 square foot space, even if we go double deck. It just is very, very hard to do.
Northern Star Railroad lines, which is still white. It's got an interesting question here. I think it might reflect back to the paper mill and all that you did on this layout. Could there be a small ethanol plant?
Yeah, I want to go to that picture just for the fun of it here, because I think that's a really good picture of what you can do with just a little bit. Again, there is a an airplane view of the Potlatch paper mill. It's huge. Here's the parking lot for the cars alone here, and that it's just incredibly large facility. Well, it's the biggest facility on the Camas Prairie Railroad. So I wanted to have it on the layout, but there was no way I could obviously do this. So I came up with this rendition of it here. And yeah, I think you could easily do a smaller version of it, because I think there's 2 or 3 of those ethanol buildings that they don't even get rail service. All they get is truck service, car service, and that. And you could. And another way to do it also is this picture you're looking at here is sitting on the front of a 24-foot wide space or deep space. You could take the ethanol plant, put it on the back wall of a space like this, and take the buildings and make them half buildings. Just make the buildings half as deep as they normally would be. That might be believable. There, yeah. I've done that on many plans where I've taken a particular building and cut it down. The building you see where it says the paperboard mill there, that's just a pike stuff building that I modified to fit that location. There, it's just a bunch of those walls I put together. This track you see right here where it goes inside the building, that's the shipping area. This here are 2 doors where it's the receiving area. And then this was where the wood chips got dumped off. And of course I have the stock here. And when they were building, when they're doing paper mill boarding, they did need some pellets and that to work with. So I added this building here, or excuse me, these tank structures as a small industry there.
Yeah.
This clear water tissue, the reason I added it, it's really just kind of a funny thing I did. Clear water tissue produces toilet paper.
Yeah.
So when I would have a car here parked here to be picking up product, if you looked at the car card, it would say, for the commodity, it would say toilet paper on it. And guys would always say, "I'm picking up toilet paper," and I go, "Yep, that's what you're doing right there."
Yeah. Hey, you gotta do the commodious jobs too.
You have to do the commodious jobs. That's exactly right. Exactly.
All right, Bill, that was a really good show. I appreciate it. Everybody else in the Q&A appreciate it.
Well, thanks for letting me do it, guys. I do appreciate it.
Looks like you were holding their interest there pretty good. The questions didn't come in until right there towards the end, so I think they were just waiting.
Nobody wanted to interrupt me, I guess.
Yeah, well, they wanted to make sure they got it all first before they did that.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Well, I want to say go to YouTubeModelBuilders.com. There you can check the schedule for all our shows that we have, the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday shows. Thursday show is every week, so we don't need a schedule for that one. Don't forget the time for the Tuesday and Wednesday has changed. That is 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. Thursday and Saturday live show is 9 o'clock Central, 10 o'clock Eastern time. I'm going to start writing this down, keep it straight. All right, tomorrow we have the Arduino show. Starts at 8 o'clock Central time. Then, of course, the Thursday show, but then also on this Saturday we have the live show with Big Bill and Barry. So you want to be sure and stay tuned for that. Also on YouTubeModelBuilders.com, be sure and click on the eMag so you can get signed up where you'll get a notification, because that's coming out here pretty soon. JD and his team do a bang-up good job. Of course, that's the community magazine. Community people submit articles, and JD and them put them in there and make them look good. So you want to be sure to check that out. I want to say thank you for participating in tonight's show. We appreciate it. Appreciate everybody in the chat. Bill, appreciate it again. Fine show. Thank you, sir.
Glad to do it for you. Thank you. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. All right. With that said, everybody have a good night, and come on back in tomorrow night for another good show on the Arduino. See y'all later. Have a good one.